All right, we're live. So this is the podcast. I'm sitting here with Coach Jason Prasad. I am Adam Farr, and today we are discussing gut health. Yes, why having a leaky gut makes you fat, sick, tired, in pain. So Jason, why don't you start off by telling me what a leaky gut is?
What a leaky gut is. Essentially, a leaky gut is where, we have this gut lining and it's made of soft tissue. Now, leaky gut is essentially where the body starts to actually poke holes in that lining. And now we're getting microbes that are supposed to stay in our GI tract, in our intestinal system, and they start leaking out into the body, allowing our immune system to essentially attack it and create health issues for us.
And why is this important? Why is this the fundamental, I guess you could say, reason that people are in pain or overweight?
That's a complex question, but essentially, when we have issues with our microbiome and our GI tract, they allow bad bacteria to proliferate and grow, which essentially cause many of our health issues and allow us to gain weight, which a lot of us have a goal of trying to lose weight and be in shape. Now, Adam works with a lot of people whose goal is to lose fat and get their dream body. Meanwhile, a lot of people that work with me have more chronic health issues or more chronic pain per se as a result of gut health. So while both of us do a lot of the same thing, we have different demographics, but it all comes down to the very basic premise of gut health.
Great, awesome. So let's have a conversation, me and you, all right? And everyone's going to listen on this conversation. When I started doing what I do now, which is helping people to find rapid weight loss, to lose fat as quickly as possible. And I always say, when you're on my program, you're going to lose half a pound to a pound of body fat per day. I'm always trying to reiterate the importance of the gut and how that's actually the root cause of all their issues. And I came up with this acronym a few years ago. The acronym is GMBM complex, this term I created. And GMBM stands for the gut, the microbiome, the brain, and the mitochondria. And this is the concept that I came up with, which allows you to kind of see the vicious cycle, if you will, of how things start to go wrong. They start to go wrong in the gut. When the gut becomes damaged or when the gut is not functioning properly, well, that indirectly affects your microbiome. Your microbiome being the microbiota, the bacterial species living inside of you. And then that kind of leaks into your brain, how your brain functions. Once your brain starts to dysfunction, you have mood problems, emotional problems, energy problems.
How does that happen? How does your microbiome affect your brain?
Well, okay, so in principle, the microbiome is responsible for creating a lot of neurotransmitters, setting up the preconditions that allow neurotransmitters, which are the chemical signaling molecules in your brain, which allow you to experience emotions, things like motivation, happiness, drive, positive emotions, things like sadness, feeling upset, feeling depressed. Basically, those molecules that travel up into your brain, they are produced in the gut. And they're produced by these alien species, these microscopic creatures.
Microbes.
Yeah, these microbes. Yeah, they're not they're not mammalian. They are microbial.
Because we're actually more bacteria than human.
We are more bacteria than human. Yes, we're about 90% bacterial mass, or is it molecular weight, and we're 99% bacterial DNA. Yeah. And if the cultures of bacteria in your microbiome, if the types of bacteria that you house inside of you are not the right types, not in the right ratio, if the populations move towards bad bacteria like Candida or whatever you could think of, H. pylori, parasites, whatever.
The list goes on and on.
Yeah, if you have the wrong types of bacteria in your body, well, you're going to experience that as emotions in your body. You're going to experience that as ill health in your body.
We have to understand that there are some of these bacteria already inside of us, but in managed populations when we're healthy, right? And it's when we become unhealthy and we don't take care of our diet and our lifestyle that we allow these bad populations to grow and proliferate, which then cause health issues.
Where does this original set of bacteria come from? You start off as a child, right?
100%.
Yeah.
A lot of our bacteria cultures actually come from our mom as we're going through the birthing process. They enter our mouth, they cover our face. That's how a lot of it starts, with the majority of it after that coming from mom's breast milk. So if you had a C-section and then you were bottle fed, you're at a very compromised immune state when it comes to your microbiome. And those are usually the children we find that get ear infections, tonsil infections, that kind of stuff, which puts them on a lot of antibiotics and medication at a young age, setting them up at a very compromised state for health issues as they move into their late teens, 20s, and 30s.
So, as I understand it, people get trapped in this, people like to say, I had bad genetics. I've always been fat.
Yes,
I've always
been this way.
I've always been this way. I've always been fat. I've always had, arthritis. I've always had pains. I've always been moody. But why is that, right? And what I've come to appreciate is that the state of your mother's microbiome, or
100%.
is a huge indicator, right? Normally what happens in a normal birthing process is the birth is done vaginally, right? And
out of a stressful environment.
Yeah, like a nice, quiet, exactly.
home,
The doctor shouldn't be
hospital.
spanking the baby on the ass as soon as it's out of the womb. But you're born, and as you pass through the vaginal canal, the microbes in your mom's body, what are they? It's lactobacillus strains that basically, they migrate down to the vaginal area, and as you're coming out of your mom's birth canal, you get a nice slop of these bacteria on your face. It goes up your nose, goes in your eyes, goes in your mouth, and that seeds your microbiome. That's the beginning seed. Yeah. Other than that, you don't really have much of a microbiome before that
Your
moment.
microbiome is actually a postnatal organ. It's actually been defined as an organ now.
Okay.
An organ in the system, and it's postnatal because you're not born with the microbiome. You develop it post-birth, right? With the seed process being the actual birthing process, secondary being the breastfeeding process.
And then after that initial birthing process, it takes about 2 years for you to have a fully seeded microbiome.
Unfortunately,
not fully mature.
We interject that with vaccinations, among other things.
Yeah, let's not touch on that too much. But that's what happens. And I was actually born by C-section,
Okay.
and I actually suffered
Did you
from.
have health effects because of it?
Yeah, I will tell. In hindsight, I understand now. Oh, that's why this and that happened. In studying the microbiome and appreciating it in the way I do now, I understand that. Hey, you know what? Yeah, that's why I had allergies as a kid. That's why I was moody and cranky all the time. That's why.
Did you crave sugar?
Man, I ate a lot of crap growing up. Like no offense to my mom and dad. There was crap in the house, and I ate it. I grew up having acne. I grew up having mood swings. I grew up having all these other things. What's worse is when I was about 14 years old, personal story of mine, and I only put these puzzle pieces together in the last 6 months, I'd say, I had appendicitis attack. And my appendix actually burst open, and it was leaking septic bacteria.
Over.
And for those people who don't know, the appendix is not a vestigial organ. It's not a useless part of your body. It's actually a place that houses bacteria, good bacteria, that in the case of massive diarrhea or infection, your body has a reserve of these microbial populations that it could kind of squirt back into your colon and create that balance again, repopulate.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I had that. Mine became inflamed due to a poor diet, and it started to grow and expand and get clogged, and it eventually burst after about 5 days of what I thought was a really bad stomach ache. Exploded inside of me, spewed out basically, septic fecal matter inside of me, and I was, hours and hours from death.
Yeah, literally.
Actually, I was rushed to the hospital, and I was actually passing out on the way. And after that happened, they removed my appendix. Of course, they gave me just a nice course of antibiotics for the next week in the hospital.
Sent you on your way.
And what was I left with at the age of 14? A completely destroyed microbiome. And guess what happened for the years that preceded that? For 7 years, moody, anger issues, poor sleep, all this stuff. Didn't know it then what was going on.
No neurotransmitter production.
And just a moody kid. And that's what got me into fitness. What got me into fitness was seeking relief from, the internal state that I was experiencing because of this imbalance or this dysbiosis, as it's called. And
so essentially, that created a leaky gut situation for you.
Yeah, which I think has only been healed in the last few years, to be honest with you. Maybe like 4 or 5 years, yeah.
Let's go back to GMBM.
So that's the gut. That's how important it is. And then the M is the microbiome, right? Mm-hmm. And now these two principles or these two concepts tie into the functioning of your brain. Okay. And if I ask you, who are you? You would say your thoughts. I'm my thoughts and my beliefs, more or less.
Yeah, you define your ego, basically.
Yeah, and where do they come from? And in the materialist world we live in, you'd say from my brain, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, if the thoughts and beliefs you have or the perceptions you experience come from your brain, then you have to ask yourself what influences the brain. And now we know in science that the gut and the microbial balance inside of you influences your brain, therefore your thoughts and perceptions. Yeah. And so, in a roundabout way, if your gut's unhealthy, okay,
you have unhealthy thoughts.
You want to have unhealthy thoughts, and it's hard for people to grasp this idea.
That goes a step further now, because those unhealthy thoughts now create unhealthy perceptions of your environment and the world around you, basically making you suffer for no reason to a certain degree.
And then unhealthy perception becomes unhealthy belief system, and then it's like
habits, lifestyle, and
yeah,
you get in the cycle that can't be broken.
And then you start to believe things like, I have bad genetics, I'll never lose weight, I'm stuck this way, I'm ugly, I'm not smart, whatever it may be. Yeah. Really, if you consider it, it's your gut.
Yeah,
you're perceiving things, but it's your gut.
And if you're perceiving things based on neurotransmitters that you have available to you, and when you don't have the right ones, well,
yeah,
you set yourself up in a poor position.
Yeah, like your microbiome is kind of like the lens that colors your perception. And if you have a poor microbial balance,
from a chemical perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And if you're looking at everything through rose-colored glasses, then everything's rosy. If you're looking at everything through dull, foggy, dirty glasses, then everything's dirty. Yeah. But your perception of that reality depends on your physiology.
I completely agree.
And then finally, the final letter in the GMBM complex is M for mitochondria. Tell me about mitochondria. I know you know a lot about that.
Your mitochondria are basically the powerhouse of the cell. In every single cell in the human body, there is a bacterial cell, which is the mitochondria. So however many billion years ago, there was a eukaryote and a mitochondrial bacteria cell that came together and essentially created what we now have as a human cell. And when we look at organ dysfunction or energetic issues or the ability to burn fat and people losing that ability, essentially, we look at a lot of mitochondrial dysfunction. So when it comes to this term biohacking that is so prevalent these days and how we take care of our health in this age in society, a lot of it relates back to how we take care of bacteria and how we work with bacterial cultures. And because we stated already that we are actually mainly bacteria, we find a crisscross between the two. So mitochondrial therapy such as Wim Hof in cold temperatures, or Tuma breathing, or different micronutrient statuses, right? We look at the mitochondria and how they actually oxidize fat for energy, and not glucose, yet we have diets so high in glucose and sugar, therefore creating a lot of health issues. So when it comes to this whole mitochondrial microbiome conversation, that's the biggest focus of health now when it comes to not only fat loss but chronic health diseases, because it always comes down to a dysfunctional mitochondria and a dysfunctional microbiome. And we look at the things that are creating dysfunction and how to help them create a better situation, basically.
Nice. So I have 4 steps that I've created when we're thinking about the GMBM complex. Yeah. I have 4 steps that you could follow using this acronym of the GMBM. Step 1, G, heal and seal your gut. That's what the G in GMBM is. Okay. Number 2 is create balance in your microbiome. Number 3 is optimize your brain function. And number 4 is energize your mitochondria. Okay. So you follow those steps. The first thing you do when you're trying to improve your health is heal and seal the gut, because that's the foundation for everything else that follows.
I would agree with that.
So what are some ways that you espouse in terms of healing and sealing your gut? What are some of the go-to things you do?
When it comes to healing and sealing the gut, it's more of not what people need to add in, it's more what they need to stop doing, or lifestyle changes that are actually negatively affecting the gut. Obviously the biggest ones for me are clean drinking water.
Clean drinking water,
Clean
yeah.
drinking water. Not enough people have clean drinking water. It's either bottled water that are full of microplastics, even tap water that has chlorine in it. We know that chlorine kills bacteria. Last time I checked, our microbiome is made of bacteria. So if you're consuming chlorinated water, now you're killing your own good bacteria.
We live in an overly hygienic society. We're afraid of microbes, but they serve us.
They serve us, right? Not enough sleep is a huge one for me. And how does that play in? Well, we know that when you get a good night's sleep, you get into REM sleep, you get into deep sleep, your cortisol levels drop. And cortisol is a huge factor into destruction of the gut and creating this leaky gut situation. And the conversation of cortisol can go really deep because we have to look at cortisol from the perspective of lifestyle factors, dietary factors, quality of food, perception of stress. Right, so we can have events that happen in our life that aren't necessarily stressful, but we can make them stressful based on perception.
Tell me this. I'm curious for myself. I don't think I know this, but what is the mechanism that makes cortisol destroy the microbiome?
Basically, we have these tight junctions in our gut, and cortisol opens up these tight junctions.
It's a trigger for that. Okay.
Yes. So
one of many triggers.
Right?
Yeah.
So tight junctions are pathways where micronutrients can go from the GI system into your bloodstream.
Yeah.
And cortisol starts to break these apart, allowing bigger particles to get into your bloodstream. Your immune system starts to attack it, and that's one of the easiest ways to then develop food intolerances.
So in my system, I call these toxic invaders. They're things that are on the inside in your digestive tract, and they shouldn't be there.
Well, we have to acknowledge first, sorry to interrupt, that your GI tract is not inside your body, but outside your body.
Yes.
Right? So we have to understand that what's in our GI tract isn't actually in our body until it passes through this lining. And when we lead a poor lifestyle and high stress lifestyle, then we open up these barriers, allowing the inside world to get into our inside world, creating health issues.
Yeah, a nice metaphor I read about that is if you're driving your car and you're passing underneath a water system, a lake, and you go in this tunnel, you say, well, are you in the lake or are you outside of the lake?
You're technically outside.
You're outside the lake, but you're going through this tube that passes through it. So your digestive tract is the same thing. It's not the inside of your body, it's the outside of your body. It's the inside skin of your body. And if this epithelial lining, this one layer thick wall of cells is breached, or if it's weakened, then particles that are either like undigested food particles, that's one, will get into the bloodstream. Your immune system will not recognize them as what they're supposed to be. Or pathogens, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, parasites, other living creatures will sneak into that broken barrier, and in a sense, your castle wall will be breached. And that's what sets off the immune system. And it's the immune system being set off which creates the innate inflammatory response. And it's basically...
But it's not even so much the invaders that set off the immune system. It's more the byproducts, right? So when it comes to food particles, for sure the immune system's going off. When we're talking about different bacterial cultures, fungi, parasites, because of their parasitic nature and our host-like nature, our immune system often doesn't overreact to the capacity that we want it to, and our health issues suffer because of the byproducts of those parasites, fungi, and the byproducts they create from feeding off of us, essentially.
Yeah, byproducts I know about are, one of them is bacteria. When a bacteria is killed or a bacteria dies, and that exoskeleton, if you will, opens up, it releases LPSs, lipopolysaccharides, or also little pieces of shit. I think I read that in David Perlmutter's book. And your body will react to that. It'll react to the dead bacteria, not the bacteria itself.
Ammonia as well.
Ammonia from parasites.
Formaldehyde.
Formaldehyde, where would that come from?
Fungus. Candida.
Okay. Candida produces formaldehyde. Nice.
As a byproduct, that's why a lot of people experience brain fog in relation to candida, right? So it's just like alcohol. You have a hangover all the time, essentially. And the problem with candida is because when you feed them, you get a hangover, and when you kill them, you get a hangover.
Nice.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like if you're feeding them or if you're trying to kill them, you kind of have the same symptomology, which is unfortunate sometimes, where a lot of people actually continue to eat sugar and carbs because they feel better feeding the fungus. Because when they stop feeding it and it starts to die,
they strike back.
They get
Yeah.
Herxheimer reactions. They get sick, right?
Yeah.
And they get the flu and things like that, and that's why they feel so crappy.
A Herxheimer reaction is a toxic overload, or
yes, Herxheimer is basically a die-off of a parasite or a fungus that can create nausea, flu-like symptoms, things of that nature. And so people think that, oh, I need to eat sugar and carbs because I feel better that way. And although that is usually a good thought process, in this situation it's not.
Yeah, not to mention that there's a lot of carbohydrates that have morphine-like compounds in them. They have pain-numbing effects in the brain.
Among other chemicals and pesticides.
So you're just masking a much bigger problem.
Yeah.
So going back to what we were talking about here, what are some things you want to avoid when healing the gut? I have on my number 1 here is vegetable oils, polyunsaturated fatty acids, PUFAs. PUFAs. Stay away from the PUFAs. These are things like soybean oil.
And why is that?
Well, okay, first and foremost, a lot of these vegetable oils, and I always use an ancestral argument or a traditional argument. In nature, human beings, without technology, without...
Anthropology, I always come back to that. How did we survive 35,000 years?
And we did not survive by gathering up thousands of soybeans to squeeze a little bit. So, soybean oil, right? Why wouldn't we consume something like soybean oil? Or wheat germ oil? Or name another one for me. Vegetable oils in general. Anyway, you wouldn't gather up a bunch of vegetable oils in nature, squeeze out the little bit of oil out of it, and then consume that.
Very ineffective.
Yeah, and so it's not a natural process first and foremost. So that's one reason to kind of look at it with a bit of suspicion and be like, well, why are we doing that now? Obviously, with manufacturing and industrial processes, this makes sense from a business perspective.
It's very cheap and easy to grow.
Yeah, cheap, easy to grow. It's plentiful. You could take old soybeans and you could squeeze out for the oil, whatever it may be. We know that vegetable oils and the oils found inside of them are pro-inflammatory.
Yes. Why?
The exact reason why, like molecularly, maybe I don't know.
No, it's more from a soy perspective, right? There's numerous studies showing the effects of soy and the inflammatory nature they have to the majority of people, right?
Yeah.
You can't say all, but the majority. And I mean, from a cooking perspective, vegetable oils often go rancid at high cooking temperatures.
They oxidize quickly, yeah.
They can't withstand the heat.
Well, I answered your question, and they're easily oxidized,
Yes.
right? So they react with oxygen more readily than these other molecules, and that has to do with the bonding of their hydrogen bonds, right?
Yeah.
Saturated fat being a much better fat to choose than vegetable oils.
Yes. So, contrary to that,
Yeah.
what should people be cooking with?
I use and I recommend highly using ghee butter, which has a very high smoke point, right? Which is what it's called. Coconut oil is another one.
Yep.
Lard is another one. These are all traditional fats. This is what people have been using.
Or avocado oil is what I like.
Yeah,
To a certain degree.
Yeah, and then butter. I mean, grass-fed butter.
Why would someone go with ghee over butter, considering they're very much similar?
So in the world we live in today, we live in a toxic environment, and every decision you make is basically is based on this idea that, okay, we're living in a toxic world, and this is the underlying reason why we get fat, sick, and tired.
Yes.
So the reason you want to make ghee butter instead of just straight up cow butter is you want to actually filter the butter of its impurities. So the process of making ghee butter involves separating a lot of the milk solids from that butter.
Yeah.
You heard of people being lactose intolerant.
Yes.
So you're removing a lot of that lactose, you're removing a lot of those amino acids, and so the most of the butter, let's say 95% of it, becomes non-reactive. There's just less in your body for you to react to, and you're just left with this golden fat.
Yep. For me, the conversation, not that butter is bad, but I always have this conversation of, most of us are lactose intolerant to a certain degree, considering we lose the majority of our lactase enzymes by the time we're about 6, since we're not breastfeeding anymore, right? We should be breastfeeding up to the age of 3 or 4, as we did for decades upon decades to establish this microbiome. It's only in today's society that we really don't have breastfeeding past the age of 1 or 2 due to societal reasons.
It's considered weird now, right?
Yes, but if you go to indigenous populations, you'll see a toddler, breastfeeding, and they're the healthiest living in the dirt.
Yeah, and they grow. I'm thinking of the Maasai culture now in Africa. They grow. Their average height is like 6'2" or something like that. And
right. So I mean, you see how the variety of these all come in together. Mm-hmm. Okay, next.
Carbohydrates.
Wonderful.
Carbohydrates in general. I'm talking about wheat products.
Yes.
Really.
Yes.
Wheat is another reactive substance.
And we have to be aware that we're speaking, or at least from my perspective, wheat more here in North America than Europe.
Oh man, it's everywhere.
Okay.
I mean, not to get into the politics of it too much, but a lot of GMO wheat and seeds has spread.
Yes, I would agree
across the globe, and it would be pretty hard to actually know for sure unless you're getting a heirloom grain or something and you've grown it yourself.
You know what? Like, I hear what you're saying with that because you really don't know.
You really don't, yeah.
But I mean, we're healthy enough that we don't get the worst reactions to things like that. When you work with people with Crohn's and celiac and more dire gut issues, and over here they have gluten or grains, commercial grains, and they're on the ground keeled over in pain, but they can go to Europe and eat grains as well and not have those side effects. So based on client testimonial, I know there has to be a difference in terms of what's in Europe and then what's here in North America.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if I eat a pizza in Italy, I'm not going to be bloated. If I eat a pizza here, I'm going to have bloating, right?
Okay, so why are grains so bad?
Well,
Carbohydrates.
Well, it's not just the carbohydrates. There's gluten in it, and gluten spurs or excites the release of something called zonulin. Zonulin, whatever you want to call it.
Which is a great test to know if you have leaky gut. It's actually called a zonulin test.
A zonulin antibody test.
Yes, essentially.
And zonulin is another trigger, just like the one we mentioned before. It's just another thing that opens up the gap between your epithelial lines, those tight junctions, exactly. Yeah. So that's really the main reason to avoid that. And then not to mention, in North America, GMO grains, pesticides, you're finding a herbicide on a lot of foods.
Glyphosate is the main issue, right?
Glyphosate's a huge trigger, probably the biggest one.
It's a huge trigger, if not the biggest one. It's sprayed on the products, it's in the soil, therefore it gets into the DNA of the product that you're now consuming. Along with the gluten conversation, I can't disregard lectins. Lectins are also in grains.
Yep.
These plant-like defenses that are found in grains, beans, lentils, and also nightshade vegetables. So when I see people that have intolerances specifically to lectin groups, obviously I find them in the carbohydrates, and I find that it's not always a gluten issue, but actually potentially sometimes a glyphosate lectin issue when it comes to grains.
I have a comment about lectin. Okay, yeah. The lectin problem exists, at least for our modern culture, because we eat food out of season, 100%. And that's non-local. 100%. And so what happens is a lectin is a plant protein.
It's a defense mechanism.
Yeah, it's like an insecticide, and it forms on the skin of the plant and around the seeds. And the idea is simple. If an insect is trying to eat that plant, it's going to eat some of these lectins, and the insect will become paralyzed from consuming that. Yeah. And but the thing is, in terms of the natural cycles of plant growth, as the seasons change and the plant is ready to or the plant, let's say the tree is ready to be harvested for its fruit, and the apple, the lectin production on that plant will decrease because now the plant is ready to be eaten and have its seeds spread. So this is one of the reasons to eat in season and locally.
And rotate your food. Yeah,
it's not just, people don't just say eat in season and eat locally for no reason. Lectins are the underlying reason you want to do that. Otherwise, you're eating poisons.
Well, I can further that conversation by working with vegans and vegetarians that eat plant-based foods a lot, especially out of season.
Yeah.
We're here in Canada in the middle of winter, and all they're doing is eating vegetables, and you want to know why they have health issues.
Yeah. Usually,
not very conducive for
your health will dip as a vegan in winter in a northern part of the world.
But often I see a lot of fungal overgrowth, believe it or not, due to the amount of lectins these people are consuming, often conventional, not organic. So it breaks down the gut lining, as we talked about. there are fungus on a lot of vegetables and nuts and seeds, which we also know about. Then they're eating beans and lentils, which are high in soy, which cause problems. And, you know, originally a lot of people go to a plant-based diet because they're having health issues to begin with, like GI issues. So they take away dairy, they take away meat products. And I mean, I know this is on your list as well, but that just goes into a hydrochloric acid conversation. So now you have low stomach acid because they were already in a situation where probably they had low stomach acid due to stress and lifestyle environments.
Lack of sodium.
And now they're in a compromised GI state, which allows the ability for things like fungus and parasites to grow, where they now pump full of lectins, soy, and fungi.
Yep. All things. Excess animal protein consumption. How does that contribute to a leaky gut? Animal flesh putrefies. It feeds certain bacteria, some good, some bad. You have to really consider what animal you're eating, where you got it from, what it ate. If the animal ate grain, you're consuming the grain it ate. If the animal was pumped with antibiotics, you're consuming those antibiotics.
Yeah, so it comes down to quality of the meat.
Quality sourcing,
Quality sourcing, grass-fed, local, antibiotic-free at the very least. And then you go into the conversation of, do you actually have the acidity in your gut to digest that animal protein? And
exactly.
A lot of people don't.
And if you don't, it'll putrefy inside of you.
It starts feeding things.
It'll creating
heartburn sensations, among other things, that a doctor then tells you to go on a proton pump inhibitor or a Tums or something like that.
An antacid,
to lower your acid in your gut, actually creating more problems for you long term. So here you are now in a situation where you're symptom free because you're taking something to remove the symptoms. You have animal flesh putrefying in your system, feeding microbes and other stuff, and your health is getting consistently worse over time, and you are not the wiser because you're taking something to block your symptoms.
And this is all rooted in stress and poor digestion that results, 100%. Essentially. If you are living a stress-free life and you're managing your stress.
I wouldn't say stress-free. It's managing. How do you manage your stress? And perception, mental space, energetic awareness, setting boundaries are all how we manage that stress profile.
I'd like to touch on something. You mentioned cortisol earlier and what it does. Well, cortisol competes for the same minerals and compounds that allow you to produce hydrochloric acid, which allows you to digest. Which are what? Sorry?
Yeah, what minerals?
Zinc, magnesium. I mean, I'm not going to get them all here. I'm not a chemist, right?
Zinc, magnesium. Those are the two that I wanted.
Okay, well, great. Then I've satisfied you. So when you're stressed out, naturally, your body has to choose. Do I produce cortisol, which I need to produce in order to balance out my nervous system and deal with this stressor and run away from this tiger that I'm perceiving, I guess you could say? Or do I produce stomach acid? And so you have a battle between rest and digest, fight or flight. Well, when there's a tiger chasing you or you're perceiving a stressful moment, you choose the most immediate survival advantage, which is to run away from the tiger or to deal with it. And you're not worried about digesting. That's why digestion stops when you're stressed. If you're constantly stressed out, constant negative thoughts, constant negative perceptions or disempowering perceptions about your situation, you're not producing stomach acid. Then on top of that, you eat a meal under that stress, under that deadline. What happens? You have indigestion. You have these undigested food particles passing into your bloodstream, creating an immune response. It's the immune response and the inflammation that makes you fat, sick, and tired.
100%. I mean, perception of stress goes as far into breathing patterns, right? And you get an inverted breathing pattern, which is now looking at your CO2, O2 balance and affecting so many things on that level, right? And so when I start into this conversation of stress management, I start with simply breathing because there's so much research out there now showing HRV and, just deep belly breathing and the effect it actually has on the nervous system. So if someone is a stress ball and, has a difficult time managing their stress due to life events and whatever else, teaching them how to breathe can have a huge impact on their health. Because at least you're doing something that's changing their nervous system state over from, like what you said, fight or flight to rest and digest.
I just changed my breathing now since you mentioned it. Thanks for the reminder.
A little reminder.
Frequent eating, how does that affect your gut health?
It's frequent eating. So again, you want to look at the state of the GI system.
Okay.
When it comes to frequent eating, right? So most people eat way too much for the state of their GI tract, going back to the conversation of hydrochloric acid. For me, we don't need to be eating as frequently as we do, if I'm being completely honest. Again, going back to an anthropological point of view, and how we got here, we're scavengers to a certain degree. You know, we ate vegetables, we ate fruit, and then we had meat after a kill. And we weren't definitely not eating, 4 or 5 times in a day.
We were barely eating 1 time a day.
We were barely eating 1 time a day. You know, we were eating in the range of maybe 1 to 2 times in a more populated area. So for me, people overeat, and not only are they overeating, they're overeating junk and crap, combined with stress, lack of sleep, and then putting more caffeine in the system.
You know, I have a bit of a reputation for following a ketogenic diet, and that's one of my tools, or one of the things that I recommend people do. Part of ketogenic dieting, or getting into ketosis, is this idea of intermittent fasting. And people are like, oh, that's a new and interesting idea, fasting, not eating as frequently. I mean, that's how it's been for 50,000 plus years, and that's how it is for almost every animal on the planet, and every carnivorous animal or apex predator like a human being.
It gives your system a time to actually clean itself out of the byproducts of cellular function used in digestion.
Yeah, you're not wearing out as much. You're not wearing things out. If you slam a door open and close over and over again, eventually you're going to break the door. You're going to break a hinge, or something's going to go wrong.
Maintenance.
Yeah. So eat your meal, optimize your digestion, your absorption while you're having that single meal or 2 meals, and in the interim, give your body a break. And this is very important, by the way, in terms of the question of cancer, how cancer comes about. I don't know if you've studied the work of William Donald Kelly. Anyway, so he studied a guy named Dr. John Beard, and they found out many decades ago that a prerequisite for the metastasis or the spreading of cancer cells is a lack of pancreatic enzymes. These pancreatic enzymes are the same enzymes that digest cancer cells. Well, if you're eating 3, 4, 5 times a day, well, what are you always releasing into your digestive tract? You're releasing pancreatic enzymes over and over again. Eventually, you run out of these enzymes.
Interesting.
And so if the enzymes are not there and you're consuming these foods, then what is consuming these cancer cells, which are basically always being produced round the clock? And so the health of your pancreas literally makes the difference between developing cancer or not developing cancer.
And that was based on his research.
That was based on their research and effective cancer therapies that they helped over 33,000 people, proven cancer therapies that work. I won't get into the whole cancer discussion, but that's a very interesting one. Let's move on. How does chronic health and emotional stress affect your gut? We talked about cortisol a bit, right?
Yes,
so essentially that's the mechanism, right?
Yeah, so, I would say when it comes to cortisol and stress, we obviously have direct stressors on the body that are physical, working out, our commute to work, environmental situations at work, potentially with relationships and your boss. But this mental emotional balance and how we perceive events is the biggest thing. And that's why with a lot of the coaching that I do with people who have chronic health issues, like if it was as simple as here's how you eat and here's your supplementation, people would be better. And that's not the answer, because people don't get better off of that all the time, right? They lose fat, which is great. And that's a big part of the conversation.
Sometimes they lose fat.
Sometimes, right? But I would say, a much bigger chunk to that equation, maybe even, 70 to 80% of the equation is this mental emotional balance and how they perceive the tiger, as you were referring to, right? And this is why we do a lot of mental emotional work and deeper spiritual and personal growth work to have people understand, how it is they got to where they are. Like how did you become a Damo today, right? We already talked about how a life experience when you're 14, and this hindsight of that event explained a lot of things for you on a physical level and a sickness level, right?
And I reframed those events from a negative to a positive.
Yes, based on doing work, self-education, and looking back and reflecting.
Turning something that would otherwise be disempowering, breaking your neck in a car accident, and appendicitis, and another one was breaking my neck in a car accident, and turning that perception into something that was useful to my personal development and growth. That's a way to deal with stress, really. Yes. I'm not holding on to that baggage.
No, because you holding on to that baggage puts you in a negative state that keeps you there, and essentially as I like to put it, creates a cage that you stay in.
I like that you use that term. Okay, so now the physiology of what's happening. If I perceive stress at the cellular level, there is a flooding of calcium ions into the interstitial spaces near the cell walls. Yep. Calcium ions harden and make impermeable the cell membrane. Yep. And so, think of it, fight or flight. You want to protect yourself, harden yourself up, you become this impermeable shell. The cells experience that on the individual level. When a cell wall becomes impermeable, it cannot receive nutrients and it cannot release toxins.
Because at the end of the day, the cell is trying to protect itself.
Exactly, from the outside, right? And that message of fear, like, oh my gosh, there's something out in the environment I should be afraid of, well, that is communicated to every cell in your body. If you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to heal from chronic pain or conditions, if you're trying to have more energy, at the most fundamental level, it's your cell that must become healthy because you are a collection of cells.
I would agree with that. To another level that people may understand a little bit more, we spoke briefly about every emotion being chemicals, right?
Yep.
Every emotion that we have is this concoction of different chemicals in different amounts. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
We're making paint, we put certain dyes, boom, we got the color that we
Different
want.
hues or shades,
Yes, exactly. And so that's what emotions are. And emotions are chemicals. Now, let's say there is an event, we watch this event, which we create a perception or a meaning of this event, which creates an emotional profile. Therefore, a chemical release called neuropeptides from the brain. These neuropeptides flood your system, and let's say it was anger or hate. Now we have your entire body responding to chemicals or neuropeptides in an anger or hate state. Your heart rate's going to go up, your blood pressure is going to go up, and now we're in a fight or flight state.
And it's because these peptides are signaling molecules which bind to receptor sites on the cells.
On the cell membrane. Yeah. Therefore, now the cell membrane is taking that information and going to the nucleus and transmitting that information. Now we have DNA, RNA, protein. We have to understand that we only have so many genes, and different genes can turn into 150,000 different proteins. So we have all these variations that are essentially affected by the environment of the cell and what's coming into the cell membrane, which is not just chemical or nutritional or food-based, but also neuropeptides, and therefore is emotional.
Yeah, and based on what the cell perceives in its immediate environment, it decides what parts of the DNA to print out, different amino acids
based
or different
on the response that it needs to solve the problem.
And you're basically, that's the exchange of information from one cell to another. Is you have chemical messenger molecules that they attach to a receptor site. That's like taking your USB and plugging it into a computer, and then the cell says, okay, this is what's happening out there, and
this is what we need to do
in
response to that.
In response to that, I'm going to produce this piece of my DNA snip here, and that could be cancer sometimes. It could be a disease. It could be arthritis.
Right.
In a simplified way of putting it. All right. Sleep.
Yes.
What is sleep? This is probably the most underappreciated and misunderstood process the human body goes through. We live in a culture, I was talking about this with my brother yesterday, we live in a culture where you are rewarded if you're the type of person who overworks, undersleeps.
Mentality.
Exactly.
It's bullshit in my opinion.
And it's like, okay, I'm surviving on 4 hours of sleep, I'm getting a lot more work done. You think you're getting a lot more work done, but are you really? No. Science and the studies would prove that you're not.
In my opinion, you're like 1 day at a time putting a nail in your tire.
Yeah.
Like 1 day at a time.
And you think you're working harder because you're working longer, but the truth is your brain doesn't function very well.
No. Your output, your productivity output or quality of output
per unit of time
goes down tremendously.
Yeah. And so you're better off working 6 hours a day, but being productive than working 16 hours a day, but you're barely.
It comes back to this idea of, we have this idea of doing more. Everybody wants to do more, get all this shit done, but how much is what you're doing actually contribute to your legacy or goal or what you're trying to accomplish in life? You know what I mean? We fill our days with social media and our phones, and it really
people are busy but not productive.
Exactly. And it's like do this, read this, write this, make this list, and we're doing all these things.
Are you describing me right now?
But there's no real direction with where people are going. And I find that just speaking personally out of working with sick populations, it's that lack of direction, that lack of focus on where they're going that creates problems, because people are just going day to day and they have no, destination in sight. They have no end goal.
No map.
And we know that specifically to people who want to lose fat. Here's the goal, right? Here's the end line that I want to get to. And
what's the process
to get there? But in order to create a process, you have to know where you're going. And a lot of people have no idea where they're going because they've accepted this idea that I am the way I am, and I have a bad knee, I have a bad shoulder. Like, I thought gut issues were normal. I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
I thought everyone has gut issues. No, it's not a thing.
Yeah, that's a larger problem of complacency in general. But you could track that all the way back to gut health, right?
Oh, completely.
Why are you complacent? Well, your gut's not healthy.
Not only gut health, but also like parental upbringing and societal upbringing. Like, a lot of people, for you and I were, second half of our 20s here, and I grew up in this genetic age, genetic diseases. And that's what I'm working with now, trying to disprove this idea of genetic diseases and how it's all a product of environment.
Yeah.
And we're essentially, rerouting someone's entire environment. Because if you try to get somewhere or if you're trying to, end up in a different place doing the exact same thing, well, you're going to go insane, literally.
I want to just, let me get very clear on this, because people don't understand what genetics are, okay?
Yes.
And so, this is the metaphor I use. The metaphor is, your genes, your DNA is like having a library, a wall of books. And every human being more or less has the same collection of books. And some books read, you're developing arthritis, you're developing cancer, you're muscular, you're fat, you're thin, whatever it may be. Whether that gene is expressed depends upon whether you go, grab the book, open it up, and read it.
Yep.
In your body, this means producing a certain protein at the molecular level. Now, what encourages you or incites you to go pick that particular book? It's something in the environment that says, it is necessary for me to go and read this book based on a trigger in the environment. That's the idea or the science of epigenetics.
Yeah, and that's you're exactly right. But we're going, in terms of the microbiome conversation now, we're going as far as to find that different microbes in your GI tract can actually change genetic expression.
Based on what they sense.
Exactly.
Yes.
So now we're looking at cultures of the microbiome, bacteria of your gut, actually changing genetic expression because of different populations in your gut. So this goes back to the conversation of how do we take care of the microbiome in an efficient way to not only affect mental health, physical health, but also long-term genetic expression.
And how to improve communication or signaling between the different cultures of bacteria in your body. Poor food hygiene. Basically...
we're talking like pesticides?
Well, your food can be full of toxins, full of pathogens.
Especially here in North America.
So on the one hand, they say cook your meat well, so you kill all the bacteria in it. Okay, but then on the other hand, if you overcook your meat, you denature everything, and
add carcinogens if you burn it.
And you add carcinogens, and you're losing a lot of the nutrient value.
That depends on how you cook it. Are you cooking vegetable oil or animal fats?
Exactly. So, one of the best things you could do when preparing meats is to make sure you're sourcing your meats from an organic farm, from a responsible farmer who knows what they're doing.
I think they call it biodynamic farming or biological farming.
Biodynamic farming is probably the best type of farming out there. And now, even then, you eat this meat, it's a little bit on the raw side. Not raw, but, medium, less than medium. It's juicy, right? It's good. It's a good steak. You would never have a charred piece of steak at a restaurant. So you're eating a steak, but now you have a higher risk of inviting pathogens into your body because you haven't overcooked it. But this is where the prerequisite of having a healed and sealed gut comes into play, because you can handle that. And an acidic stomach.
Acidic stomach, right? Having enough acidity and everything like that.
Yeah, and you should be fine. I mean, human beings weren't overcooking their meat for most of history.
And I mean, we've talked a lot about hydrochloric acid and acidity of the gut. And it's, it's not the easiest thing to change stress and perception of stress and our lifestyle as quickly as we may want it, especially if you don't have a coach. And so getting a digestive enzyme that has, bile salts or pancreatin with hydrochloric acid and digestive enzymes is often something I recommend to most people in our society, to at least kickstart that process of making sure that they have the necessary acidity in their gut. And then we go into the conversation of micronutrients, as we talked about, that creates hydrochloric acid.
Certain digestive salts and enzymes and acids help break the cycle of dysfunction.
Yes.
That's when you apply those things. The more stressed you are, the more supplements you need to counteract that.
To counteract the stress.
To counteract it. And if you don't get rid of the stress, you're on supplements.
We got to think about this. There's studies showing that cortisol, people who are stressed out deplete vitamins and micronutrients 50 times faster, 50 times faster than people who are not stressed. Right? So, we both are at 100%. I'm super stressed out, and now I'm at 50%. But we're both having a micronutritious diet, eating the same amount of food. But on a micronutritional level, I actually need twice the amount due to the way I perceive life and I live life. Right? And so, you work with people and it's like, do I really need to take all these supplements? It's like, no, you don't need to take all these supplements if you actually change your lifestyle and manage your stress better. Because you're using up all your micronutrients. But
that's a complicated question, and that takes a lot of time. Changing your perceptions of events and changing how you respond instead of react to events is a big one.
Yeah, I would agree. That takes longer, and this is where people hire coaches to go through these more in-depth processes.
We have two more.
Okay.
Organ congestion. How does this affect the health of your gut? And let me define organ congestion. Let me define what the human body is in simple terms. A human body is just a series of tubes. From top to bottom, you have your GI tract. It's just a big long tube.
Big tubes.
Your circulatory system, tubes. Lymphatic system, tubes. Light going into your eye goes through tubes, right? And so now these tubes get clogged. They're filled with water. They're filled with
metals, toxins.
Yeah, interstitial fluids is what you call them.
Crap, literally.
Yeah, and if you have a certain lifestyle that doesn't allow you to flush these toxins out and to have this open space or this river where nutrients can come in, you will get congestion. And that congestion could actually build up to the point where you're literally not going to the bathroom every day. This is colon congestion, right?
Yep.
Or your kidneys get blocked and your blood becomes poisoned as a result. Or
backed up bile in the liver, your pancreas.
What are the main organs of toxicity in the body or detox in the body? It's your colon, your kidneys, your liver. Your liver is the head honcho. Your lungs and your skin. Those are your main five. I'm not missing any.
Nope.
Lymphatic system. I wouldn't call it an organ, but
it distributes things.
These things get clogged.
Yes.
They get clogged up, and if they're clogged up, they will seep into places. These toxins will seep back into places or recirculate into the body.
Yeah.
And that recirculation of toxins will allow pathogens or microbes to take root in otherwise inhospitable places. For example, the joints. Oh, I have arthritis. Okay. Well, what's causing the pain there? There's an inflammatory process. Well, that swelling, that inflammatory process is your immune system reacting to something in the joint there. What's in there? It's a toxin. It's a pathogen that's in there.
From Paul Chek, I'm quoting Paul Chek on this, a lot of fungi actually like to live in joints.
Well, but why is that? Because there's less pressure, right? There's less flow in those areas. This is where things tend to get clogged up. If you're not drinking enough water, as simple as that, if you're not drinking enough water, then you're going to have less flow in your extremities, and you're going to start to feel...
We're just talking about joints from a health perspective, organ health perspective, not even a physical perspective, right? Which is a whole other layer.
Having a clogged liver can give you joint pain, 100%. Essentially, through a long chain of events.
It's called a viscerosomatic reflex. I work with a lot of people that come to me with chronic physical pain that's actually originally an organ problem. And we have to work from the organs backwards all the way to the...
When is it not originally an organ problem? It's like an impact injury, right?
I would completely agree with that, yes.
Unless you got hit on the head, it's...
Osteopaths use this idea of water not flowing, right? We're majority water. We're a plant with emotions, as I like to say it. And osteopaths, talk about pain and health issues as water in the system that's not moving, stagnant water. And you know, when we have stagnant water in nature, we often call that bad water because you get things that grow in it, such as mosquitoes. Right? And so you take that same process that you see in nature, biology, since we are nature and biology, and you apply it to us. And that's why osteopaths like to do lymphatic pumping and things like that. How do we get fluids moving in the system again? And obviously, for me, colon, liver, kidney are huge in terms of making sure things are flowing effectively. Others, we start to see skin problems, among other more chronic diseases.
This is the foundation of the detox protocol I use. Is I get all my clients to clear their colon out, flush their liver, drink plenty of water to help cleanse the kidneys.
Clean water.
Clean water. I actually promote the use of distilled water to actually chelate or pick up minerals or things that are kind of loose in the body. You don't have to do it forever, but for a period of time. Once you get everything flowing again, the body removes these toxins, these issues, kind of like flushing a toilet. You know, if you have a clogged toilet, you don't leave it there, right? No. If it's clogged, you get a plunger and you unclog it. Otherwise, your house is going to stink.
And I mean, that's one side of the bowels, right? The other side is people with chronic diarrhea where things are moving too quickly through the system that the body can't actually break it down and absorb it properly. And so now you have a conversation of why are things racing through the system, right? Why are things staying in the system or why are things racing through the system? They're both two sides of the coin that we need to identify as to what could be causing these problems.
I'm actually just curious now because I haven't dealt with a lot of those issues. Why are they racing through the system from your experience?
So, I mean, I do food intolerance testing and everyone responds differently. So I was intolerant to, let's use an example of avocado, for the better part of 2 years as a result of a fungal infection that I had that created my leaky gut situation, right? So just to give a backstory. So for me, avocado gave me diarrhea, right? Other people, if they're eating animal proteins or things they're intolerant to, they can get constipated. Often I find when things are more in the parasitic fungal nature, we find a lot of diarrhea and things racing through the system because the body's trying to get it out.
It's an attempt to detox.
Unfortunately, it's in the GI tract and it's not quite leaving as quickly as the body wants it to. Hence why when you get food poisoning and your food's bad, the body gets it out. You don't get constipated. And meanwhile, other people, lack of water, dehydration, food intolerances can get constipation. Or I find if they have toxic backup in the system, then they're constipated as well. Because the GI system loses its peristalsis, its contractile ability to move things through the system effectively. And then we live in a lifestyle where a lot of us sit. We wake up, we shower, do whatever. We sit on the way to work, we sit at work, we sit on the way home, and most of us sit on the couch at home. So we literally...
There's no pumping. There's no movement.
We are a cardiovascular machine that's meant to pump fluid through these tubes all day, and now we're in a situation where we're not moving at all.
The last thing that's going to affect your organ health that I have on the list here is nutrient deficiency, and that's pretty simple. Nutrient deficiency. If you don't have enough nutrients in your body, then you don't have the... I guess you could say the bricks and mortar that allow you to produce the compounds and the chemicals and the enzymes that are conducive to health. So if you're nutrient deficient, and this usually again is rooted in an issue of digestion and malabsorption. If you are nutrient,
food quality plays into that as well, unfortunately.
If you're not sucking the life energy out of what you're consuming, if you're not getting what you need out of it, well, things start to fall apart. You're missing parts and pieces. So consuming quality sourced foods, eating seasonally, eating according to your body type, all of these things ultimately play a role in gut health over the long term.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes back to gut health, we put a lot of ideas into one podcast that we can probably break down a little bit more in some finer detail. But I think the premise of this conversation is that there is a lot that plays into this idea of gut health and the multitude of factors that are layered into how to take care, maintain, or potentially rebuild your microbiome. That has a direct impact on your health, right? I think that people need to start by looking at their environment, sleep, water, and stress. And that's where I would start because
the basics.
Those are the basics. And without sleeping, without good, clean water, there is essentially no health issue or fat loss goal that can be achieved without those two to three things.
Those are the foundations. Great. Well, I think we covered it all.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for your time.
Pleasure.
Great.